Happy Whiskey Wins, everybody. This is another episode of the Whiskey Lifestyles Women in Whiskey series. I am your host, Rashawn Hall, aka Bar Time Stories. And this week we have another great episode. We have kind of been going all over the country, talking to different women who are in this great industry. And this week we are heading down to Virginia to talk Catoctin Creek with their master distiller, Becky Harris. Becky, welcome to Women in Whiskey. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you. I'm excited.
Cool. So, Becky, we in doing the research, know that you guys got into the craft whiskey game early on. So, 2009. Tell us a little bit about what Catoctin Creek is and what inspired you, you all to get. And we'll talk a little bit about who the you all is sitting, but you all to get into the whiskey industry.
Catoctin Creek, we started in 2009. We is my husband and I. We started the company. Scott likes to say, my husband likes to say that government contracting, which is what he was doing before that, taught him a great love of drinking. And he kind of came up with the idea one day and came home to me. Now, I'm a chemical engineer and I've worked in a lot of different industries, making the polystyrene foam clamshell container kind of things for carry out, making copper and nickel plating on your phones, your laptops, and even contact lenses. And those all were things that I had done before. So when Scott proposed starting a distillery, I wasn't really worried about the science of it. I figured I can learn to make contacts. I can learn to do pretty much almost anything. That's really hard. And so what I thought was going to be the challenge was making it be a viable business. And that's what I challenged him to do, as his background was really more on the business side. So, it was 2009, 2008, too big to fail, banks. And, I thought honestly that at some point, either the business plan wouldn't pan out or we wouldn't get a loan or something. But in the end, we did. We got an SBA loan and we started the company. We really wanted to talk about and tell the story of whiskey as history in the Mid-Atlantic and early United States, which is really the history of rye. And that's kind of where we started. We have a Virginia rye whiskey grain to glass. We've been doing that since 2009, and that's, then that makes it so that you have to grow slow, right? You have to, if you're actually making things grain to glass, unless you're independently wealthy, you are going to be growing your company slowly. And that's really what we've been doing for the past 14 years.
Okay. Awesome. And you mentioned getting the science part, but obviously people always say whiskey is part science, part magic. And I think one of the magical things that you guys do is this 9-hour cook. Can you explain to our viewers the 9-hour cook and how you came up with that as the right cook for your whiskey?
Well, what we really looked at was, was really making whiskey the way that it had been done, right? Before the mass industrialization of whiskey. When whiskey was made in batches, right? True batches, where you put mash in a still and you cook that mash and you distill it out in one piece. The invention of the Kentucky style beer still, really improved the economics of the industry, and it definitely made it much cheaper to make bourbon and even rye. But I think that especially with rye, that is not the optimal way to distill rye and get the best possible flavor that you can get from rye. Rye tends to have a lot of its flavor come through at the very end of the distillation. So when you're doing a distillation in a pot still, you're basically, you're cooking it and the mash is coming off, and you can push it just as long as you can to get every bit of that ethanol out. And the flavors that come out at the end of the run, so you start out The flavors are coming off super clean, super sweet. As you go on, the flavors change because the flavor of the mash itself changes, and that the steam has a different water composition and ethanol composition as the distillation progresses and the ABV of the mash itself starts to decrease. And so what it's pulling off is different stuff. And so at the end of the run, you're getting some of the most gorgeous pieces of the flavor palette for rye. You're getting this lovely, velvety, creamy texture. Those oils are coming out at the very end of the run. So that's really why we started with a pot still and why we continue to do pot still distillation, because we really feel that it brings on a lot more of what can make rye really, really fun to taste when you're out there trying new ryes.
And how much you talked about kind of focusing on the Mid-Atlantic and what its relationship to whiskey was. How much does Virginia play into your grain to glass process? Being in that, being based there is the water. What is the access to farms? What is it? What is special about Virginia whiskey?
We like to say that when you're looking at it, there is a sort of you can taste it in Virginia wines. There's a minerality that kind of comes from the as the terroir of the region. We do use 100% rye for what we make, and we use regional grains. So we're in the very northern tip of Virginia, and so we get some of our grain from down close to the Chesapeake Bay, and we get some of it, 10 miles away, and we get some of it like 20, 40 miles north of us. So we try to kind of keep it in a regional perspective. And where we are in Virginia, we get hot summers, we get cold winters. That enables the whiskey to go in and out of the barrel. It also really speaks to that kind of seasonality, and that's really what I think is so valuable. When you have it, is giving that little bit of time, different than bourbon in the need it has for the number of seasons that it needs to have to really get delicious. You know, rye can Rye has a real affinity for wood and a really gorgeous new make flavor that doesn't need as much time in the correction phase of distillation. And so what we end up with is, about 2 years, and we do it in 30-gallon barrel. That's the smallest size barrel that we could really use and still have that seasonality. And that was really just because I was the only distiller when we started. I couldn't move a 53 by myself, full one. And so, we went with the 30 as the largest option that would give us that flavor.
And tell us a little bit about the name Catoctin Creek. What inspired that name and that brand? I see you're wearing a Catoctin Creek shirt, and there's obviously some Celtic representation. Tell us a little bit about why you all named the distillery that.
So Catoctin is a regional name. The Camp David is in the Catoctin Mountains in Maryland, and Maryland has a Catoctin Creek coming south toward the Potomac, and Virginia has a Catoctin Creek a half mile from the distillery, and it goes up toward the Potomac as well. We didn't know it was hard to say Catoctin until we started to really distribute our whiskey more widely. We wanted it to really kind of reflect that we really wanted it to reflect what Virginia brings to it. So, you can see in our branding, this is actually, it's funny because it's like, oh, there's the roof line of our distillery, and on this sleeve you can see that's a dogwood. We kind of wanted to talk to the natural beauty of Virginia and just kind of reflect that in the branding.
Awesome. Cool. And you talked about working with the husband Scott. Scott's doing the business side, you're doing the whiskey. What is that? Typically, I ask people, what is a work-life balance like? But when you're working with your partner, what is that like? How did you all find any work-life balance in that when you're in the thick of it all the time?
It's their life? No. It's really it's a real challenge, when you're a small business person, and, a lot of people out there know that, small business is really, really difficult to separate from the rest of your life. Um, because of the demands of that small business, pretty much around the clock. When it's a truly small business, you are doing so much more than just what your nominal role is, and the buck stops for everything on your desk. Um, what we find works really well is I think as spouses working together, what really is important is that degree of respect and and fandom for each other. I think my husband does an amazing job of, running the business and pulling together. I mean, 14 years we've been scrapping at this and growing this brand. And, to be in this incredibly tough industry doing that, I just think he's incredible. And he thinks the same. He thinks I do great work. And that enables us to really, keep that relationship strong on the personal side as well as on the business side.
Cool. And you guys have also done some really unique releases. I think what most unique, or the one that comes to mind for me first, is the Ragnarok ride that you guys did with Guar. If you can tell people a little bit about that and who Guar is, I feel like only you can probably describe it far better than I can. Who Guar is as an entity.
Oh dear, I keep it kind of clean. Gore is a metal band. They're based in Richmond, Virginia. They kind of came out of the punk scene. Back in, cripes, it's been Gen X days, right? A lot of time, a lot of the Gen Xers out there were the ones who were tell me that it was their first concert or whatever. Their persona is aliens that are come to Earth, and they pretty much think everybody sucks. Their stage show has lots of blood and, over the top, very much kind of that metal persona. But we have mutual friends who, in the bar community, who kind of came out of the punk scene as well. And they came to us and talked about wanting to do a whiskey. They are whiskey fans and wanted to, come up with something that reflected, for a little bit of what they felt was authentic to them. Virginia, their home is in Richmond. They wanted that to be a part of the story. And so we kind of hatched a collaboration. I was able to, kind of use some tools that I hadn't really been playing with in our main releases, which are kind of like using some extra staves to add some different wood character, a little bit more blending than what I normally do. Most of our whiskey is single barrel. And, kind of create something that is stem from the same roots that we came from, but expresses itself really differently. And it's really delicious. And the band produced the art for the labels. And so, it really comes across as a really cool release. The bottles look amazing. I don't have one on me right now, but you could check us out at catoctincreek.com. And you can see them there, or at Catoctin Creek on all your socials. But we definitely have some really cool stuff. And we do a new version every year. And we're going to tweak the whiskey a little bit next year, kind of incorporate some kind of rum flavors, as well as, so the next year's is going to be really delicious. And the label is out there in the world. I'm sure you can see it out there, the one that's coming up. And it will be a tribute to Odorous Arungus, their former frontman who passed away a few years back.
Wow, it's amazing. Oh, great. And we have been asking everyone this season one singular question for each interview. And it's been, last year, obviously, the series is Women in Whiskey. First season, we talked about what does it mean to be a woman in whiskey. This year, we want to know what's a piece of advice that you would have given yourself 5 years ago, maybe other than, that you'd be working with Guar at some point. What's a piece of advice that, you would have give your younger self?
Oh boy.
Or anyone in a similar position?
I'll give it as advice to someone else. I will say that, that making sure that as a founder that you understand that your role has to be, really as chief storyteller for your brand, in addition to just making delicious whiskey and trying to keep your TTB records all correct and trying to make sure your process is exactly right every day, guess what? You're also a storyteller. And if you don't take that responsibility seriously, then you just won't be successful. And so it's kind of lean into that part of where you're learning to talk about your projects and how to, tell the story in an engaging way. And that was something that, for a while I was very focused on just the technical side. And it took me a long time to get to where I was, much more comfortable telling our story.
Well, you guys have an amazing story, and I appreciate, we appreciate you sharing that with us. I guess our last question, and we always end with a fun question, is if you could have a dram of Catoctin Creek with anyone dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I think I'm going to just kind of throw it out there, and I'm going to say that I would really, gosh, this is a stumper. Um, I think I would love to. Here's a dead or alive person that I would love to have a dram with. I would love to have a dram with Dave Pickerel. Passed away some years ago. Miss him. He was such a big personality in the industry. We never had worked with him other than on, running into him at conferences and stuff, but it's just he had such a great appreciation of telling whiskey stories and being so big and bold and personable. And I think, a lot of us in the industry really miss him.
Awesome. Yes. Well, yes, definitely love all the stuff that Dave did with Whistle Pig, and he also started Black and Whiskey with Metallica, which obviously there's some connections there.
So
But
many.
yeah, no, that's amazing. Thank you, Becky, for so much for your time and for your great juice. Anything that you want to share lastly, that anything in terms of upcoming releases that we should know about, or that you want our viewers to be aware of?
Yeah, please stay in touch with us on socials at Catoctin Creek. We also have coming up really shortly. I've just did some. We're just getting ready to bottle it. Actually, when I get back to the distillery, we're going to be bottling our cask proof hickory syrup finish. So there are local producers that make hickory syrup from the shagbark hickory. They take the bark, they toast it, and they infuse it into a hickory syrup. And then they age that in our barrels. Then when you get those barrels back, we put whiskey in it. And the hickory brings, many of us have tried maple flavored whiskey, maple whiskeys, maple syrup barrels. We do one in the fall, but the hickory syrup barrel is something really unique. It brings a little touch of smokiness with the sweetness that can just be fantastic. And that'll be coming out end of May, June, somewhere in that time frame. So look for it and check us out, like I said, online and at catoctincreek.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Becky, and cheers.
Cheers.